The Minnesota Vikings are officially moving off of the Kirk Cousins era and now entering into the JJ McCarthy era. And with loads of young and experienced talent, this team is ready to go. So the way we're going to be breaking this down is by breaking it down into 3 different segments. We'll start off by talking about things that make this team a really good roster moving forward. And then we'll talk about the opposite, some things that this franchise does scare me a little bit. And then at the very end, I'll give you guys my final synopsis on this Minnesota Vikings team. Let's begin. So when talking about any general team, I usually like to start off by talking about the general personnel on the roster. And when it comes to the Minnesota Vikings, they are one of the more talented teams in the NFC. Offensively, they have a nice mix of older veterans who have been around in the league for quite some time, who have been very productive players, such as now a Justin Jefferson, a TJ Hawkinson, and Aaron Jones, most of their offensive line, and a lot of pieces on the defense. And they surround those guys with young prospect talents like JJ McCarthy, Jordan Addison, Dallas Turner, Ivan Pace Jr., so on and so forth. And this really does create a nice unique balance of having older guys who can help you win now, while also having the younger guys who can also help you win now, but will also help you in the next 5 to 6 years. Same thing kind of applies for those veterans as well. For example, Justin Jefferson is technically a veteran on this roster, but he's going to be on this team for probably the next 10 years. And so as long as you have that guy on your roster and many more players like that, this team is set up for success for so many years to come. And one of my favorite things about this offense is just the general fact they have surrounded JJ McCarthy with as much talent as possible. One of the biggest icks I have in the NFL is that oftentimes teams will draft a quarterback and throw them into the fire with not only poor rosters, but high expectations as well. Here's a good example of this. The starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, Sam Darnold, is basically the poster child of that point. He was thrusted into a horrible New York Jets roster, had high expectations, and well, what happened? He was a failure for the New York Jets. And hell, the Jets made the same mistake with Zach Wilson, but with this Minnesota Vikings team, you're probably not going to have that happen with a guy like JJ McCarthy, because not only do you have a guy who's probably going to be starting over him for at least some weeks this season in Sam Darnold, but you've also surrounded JJ McCarthy with a buttload of talent so that when he walks in day one as the potential starter, he's going to be filled with a bunch of guys who can help this team win and also drive him into having some ease and comfort while playing as an NFL player. As I mentioned earlier, Aaron Jones is one of the best running backs in the league. Justin Jefferson is fantastic. Jordan Addison is fantastic. TJ Hawkinson is great. Offensive line is great. So the second that JJ McCarthy actually does get the start for this Minnesota Vikings team, he's not only walking into a very easy situation, but he's also going to be running an operation that is very functional. This is a team that knows what they're doing. They already have their identity established. Kevin O'Connell is a great coach and he has all the pieces in the toolbox to work with. It also does help when defensively, this is one of the better defenses in the NFC. One of my favorite things about this Minnesota Vikings team is just the general versatility on this roster. They brought in a lot of big name guys like Andrew Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, Jonathan Grenard, who are all guys who specialize in rushing the passer, but can also do a lot of other things like play and coverage as well. And you surround those guys with a lot of other younger talents like a Blake Cashman and Ivan Pace Jr. and the aforementioned Dallas Turner. And your secondary, while maybe not the greatest secondary of all time, is filled with a bunch of guys who can play competent football. This is not a perfect roster. Let's get this out of the way. I think there are a couple issues on this team, and we will discuss those a little bit later in the video. But I think just personnel-wise, there's a lot of things that are going in the right direction for this team. But I really wanted to focus in on JJ McCarthy because he is going to be the future of this roster. I don't expect him to start week 1. I do expect Sam Darnold or Nick Mullins, probably Sam Darnold, to get the start week 1, which honestly is probably the best thing that could ever happen for JJ McCarthy. Again, as I mentioned, I think throwing him into the fire week 1 against whoever they face in week 1 is probably not something that you want to do to a young guy like JJ. JJ is a quarterback who right now is arguably and more than likely is the worst quarterback within his division. And I also will say that I don't quite know 100% yet if he'll ever even be the best or one of the best quarterbacks in this division. But that's simply because the quarterbacks in this division are pretty damn great, with guys like Caleb Williams, who I suspect is going to be really good, Jared Goff, and of course Jordan Love. And I think it's pretty fair to say that JJ McCarthy doesn't quite have the level of talent of a Jordan Love or Caleb Williams, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to consistently be a bottom 15 quarterback. I think as long as JJ McCarthy is a top 15-ish quarterback, this team is heading in the right direction. I thought JJ McCarthy was worth the pick that he was taken with the Minnesota Vikings first round pick. I had him as a late first round grade, but I was more than okay with this Vikings team taking a flyer on him with their early first round pick. At the end of the day, a lot of teams needed quarterbacks, so it wasn't like he was going to fall to their second first round pick. That just wasn't very realistic. And given the fact they didn't have to trade up even more draft capital to get him, I thought it was freaking awesome. Again, JJ McCarthy has a lot of things that I like about him. He's really good in the pocket. He's got good mobility. He's a really good and strong athlete. He's got a very strong arm, and I think for the most part his mental process is there. Yes, it's going to have to speed up, and yes, it's going to have to be better at the NFL level, but I do think with Kevin O'Connell running the game, or running the show, and all the offensive pieces to surround him with, it should be a nice transition from him from Michigan to, of course, the Minnesota Vikings. But those are a lot of the positives. Again, I just kind of ran through a lot of them. There's still a ton more to talk about, but we're going to go ahead and move on to my next section, which is going to be focusing a bit on the negative side of things here. These are things that are in some control of them and some things that they're really just not in control of. We'll talk about that in more detail. Let's talk about it. So when starting off the negative portion of this video, I do want to primarily focus in on two position groups that I think do need a lot of work, and that's going to be the wide receiver 3 position and the defensive tackle position. Right now, your wide receiver 3 is Brandon Powell, Trent Sherfield, or N'Keal Harry. It's one of those three guys. And while I don't feel like Brandon Powell is a bad player per se, I just don't really know if he can step into that receiver 3 role and flourish. Of course, you do have a fantastic wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 duo in Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, so it's not like having a bad wide receiver 3 is the end of the world. But it would be nice if this team could go out there and find somebody who complements those guys and their abilities as that wide receiver 3, somebody who can just get you 500 to 600 yards with a handful of catches every single game. Again, I do believe that Brandon Powell, or whoever does actually get the start in that position, will be fine for this year, but looking into next year's draft, I wouldn't mind seeing them take a player within the back end of the NFL draft to kind of fill out that position. Obviously, we're several months away from that even being a real possibility of even looking into the draft, so I don't have any names to throw at you guys, but if you guys do, let me know in the comment section below. And then defensive tackle-wise, I don't think it's a bad room per se. Like, I think Harrison Phillips and Jonathan Ballard and some of the backups could get the job done. But when your edge rushing group is so good with guys like Andrew Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, Jonathan Grenard, it does kind of suck that the interior of the defensive line isn't particularly special. Again, Harrison Phillips and Jonathan Ballard and some of the other guys will be able to get the job done. And I don't predict that this is going to be something that just dramatically alters the pace of this defense. Like, I don't think this is going to be a death sentence for this defense. But I think if we look back on this roster and look at why this team didn't make a deeper playoff run or even didn't potentially make the playoffs, we could potentially be looking at this position and what this could mean for the defense in terms of run stuffing. That could be a general issue. Obviously, I'm not mad with them taking Dallas Turner with their second first-round pick. It would have been nice if they would have went out there and took a Byron Murphy or a Jerzon Newton or somebody, but Dallas Turner is clearly a better player than those guys, at least talent-wise. So again, I'm not particularly mad they didn't fill this position out, but I do think next year, if they can draft him with their first or second round pick, that would be a big-time upgrade. But those are really the only things that I have an issue with the offense, or with the personnel. Is there a couple offensive linemen that I would like to see get replaced? Maybe, but it's not that big of a deal right now. I really want to focus in on the two things that I think are out of control of this Minnesota Vikings team. One of them is more in control of them, but really not at the same time. We'll talk about that after I get to my first point, which is the first point being that the NFC North in general is a fantastic division, and it is young and only getting better. As it sits right now, the Minnesota Vikings came just short last year of winning the division, and when I say just short, they were several games behind the first two seeds. And those first two seeds, I don't predict are going to slow down anytime soon. The Green Bay Packers are one of my favorites to win Super Bowl this year. They're not my personal favorite. I think Detroit has a better chance of them, but they're still a freaking awesome team. With having a great free agency and draft class, the Green Bay Packers got significantly better, and with some potential strides with Jordan Love, that team is going to be a force to mess with for the next several years. And that same sort of principle applies to the Detroit Lions, who also got significantly better this offseason. And with the improvements to this offense and improvements to this defense, I think that team is going to be one of the favorites to win the NFC in general. And then, of course, we can't talk about the NFC North without all the improvements of the Chicago Bears, who are genuinely a really good roster for this year and for several years to come. I truly do believe that Caleb Williams has a strong chance to be the best quarterback within that division, and if that's the case, the Chicago Bears are not going to be a team that you could just toy around with like you were the past couple years. And while I do personally feel like this Minnesota Vikings team does have the talent to compete with those guys, because they have just as much talent, if not more, than some of those rosters, it does sort of feel like this team is a little bit behind those rosters as of today. And it also does suck that this Minnesota Vikings team is sort of having a youth movement with a lot of younger guys, kind of at the same time that a lot of NFC North teams are also doing the same thing. So I think every single year is going to be a consistent battle with this NFC North, as it always has been, but more so with more competent rosters. And with all these teams having expectations, it's going to be that much more difficult. And then the picture that's a little bit more in their control, but also kind of not, is going to be the timetable with JJ McCarthy having this rookie contract while also developing as a quarterback. One of the biggest advantages that this Minnesota Vikings team is going to be facing for the next 4 to 5 years is given the fact that JJ McCarthy is on a super cheap rookie quarterback deal. You look all across the NFL and look at all the teams that were able to take advantage of their quarterback being on a rookie deal, and that list is pretty dang small. It is obvious that without paying your top tier quarterback top tier money, it's a lot easier to build a competent roster. And while I feel like the Minnesota Vikings have definitely done so, given the fact that JJ McCarthy isn't making that much money thus far, it also does depend on what level JJ McCarthy can get to while he is on this rookie deal. Because while I do feel like JJ McCarthy has unlimited talent and can be one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, it is no choice, or it still has to be said that he has to give some time to develop into being the quarterback that we think he can be. And given the fact this Minnesota Vikings team wants to win now, while also wants to build around JJ McCarthy right now to build a Super Bowl contender while he's on this rookie deal. But we went ahead and talked about the good and of course the bad. Let's now give you guys my official kind of synopsis for this team. I'm not going to sit here and give you guys an exact prediction as to how many games they're going to win, because I'll do that later in the offseason. But I'll give you guys a small little range of where I think this team will be. I think this team will be very competitive next year. They do have a bit of a tough schedule, but I feel like they have enough easy games they can be able to win those ones, while also being able to compete with a lot of the harder games this season. My expectations for this team is that they probably won't win the division and probably will become third place again, but that doesn't mean that they're going to miss the playoffs. I have them going somewhere between 7 to 10 wins next year, which in my opinion would be really impressive for this roster, especially if JJ McCarthy gets a lot of playing time this year. I don't know if they'll make the playoffs quite yet. I haven't done every single team yet, so we'll get to that point when we get to the end of the offseason when I do my official predictions. But I do feel like this team has the makeup of one of the more competitive and complete rosters in the NFC. Would you guys tell me, what is your general prediction for this Minnesota Vikings team? Do you guys agree with the points I made, or do you guys disagree? And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.